With 35 million people around the world who consider themselves to be digital nomads, the digital nomad lifestyle is here to stay. It's a lifestyle that allows you total location independence, the ability to work from anywhere, and to truly design your life the way you want it to be. But it ain't all roses and buttercups. I've been a digital nomad for 17 years, and I've experienced some of the most incredible highs and also some of the most crushing lows. And some of those lows were avoidable if I'd known about the pitfalls in advance. In this video, I'm going to delve into the benefits of digital nomad life, but I also want anyone who's interested in this lifestyle to understand the reality of being a digital nomad, good, bad, and otherwise. So I'm going to lay out the top pros and cons of digital nomadism. Stick around to the end because my last one is a 1-2 punch, a pro that's also a con, and it can really mess you up if you're not prepared for it in advance. I speak from experience. Let's do this. Now, before I dig into the pros and cons of digital nomadism, I think it's important to take a look at the definition of digital nomad and how it has evolved over the years. When digital nomad was first coined as a term, it was a pretty literal definition, as in someone who has no home and travels full-time nomadically, and also earns their living by working online, hence the digital part of digital nomad. But I've noticed that in recent years, that term has broadened to encompass a much larger group of people than just remote workers who travel full-time. This started happening before the pandemic. I noticed as the term digital nomads started becoming more popular, people liked the idea of calling themselves digital nomads, even if they had a home base and were just traveling for a few months of the year. That's all good. I have no problem if that's you and you want to call yourself a digital nomad. In fact, it served me pretty well because after 12 years of traveling the world full-time with no home, I returned to my hometown of Toronto to get a place. I wasn't hanging up my traveling shoes, but I needed a place of my own to unpack, unwind, and assimilate a dozen years of travel experiences. I talk about this more in my episode about the ugly truth of full-time travel, so check that out if you want the full scoop on why I made that transition. Now, that was in late 2018, and I kind of thought if I was getting a home base, it meant that I could no longer call myself a digital nomad. But that was also around the time that I noticed more and more people calling themselves digital nomads, even if they had home bases. All of this to say, this is the environment that we went into the pandemic with. Then, of course, the pandemic necessitated that companies around the world go remote or become obsolete. So practically overnight, millions upon millions of people's jobs became remote. Now, a few years later, we have a completely new work environment and culture. So while it used to be that digital nomads were mostly freelancers or entrepreneurs, we've now seen a huge uptick in digital nomads who are remote employees of companies. Maybe you're one of these people. You now have a remote job and you're considering taking your job on the road and working remotely while traveling for a few weeks or a few months or a few years or maybe even forever. Here's the unfiltered version of what that's like. Let's start with the pros, because pros. This first one may seem obvious, but it's not to be underestimated. And it's that as a digital nomad, you get to travel the world. And you don't have to conquer the world either. You can travel wherever you want. Countries like the US and Canada are so large that you could spend a lifetime discovering them alone. Heck, I know an Irish guy who spent 10 years as a digital nomad before he ever left Ireland. And Ireland's not a big country. Regardless of how you define digital nomad, the core ingredient of the lifestyle is travel. And I believe there are as many ways to travel the world as a digital nomad as there are people doing it. This leads me to the next pro of being a digital nomad, which is lifestyle design freedom. This is one of the reasons why I think it's cool that the term digital nomad doesn't need to be taken totally literally. While I do think there is a difference between digital nomads and expats and tourists, they're also not mutually exclusive. For example, most digital nomads are also tourists to a certain extent because we're traveling the world, and in so doing, we're doing touristy things at least some of the time. Otherwise, why would we travel if not to learn about and experience the places that we're visiting? The difference between digital nomads and expats is perhaps a little more defined because I would say that an expat is someone who has relocated somewhere on a more permanent basis and has likely gotten some kind of permanent residency in that new country. Whereas I would say a digital nomad, by design, is going to move on. But digital nomads can become expats if we find a place that we like enough to want to call home. This is one of many ways that the concept of lifestyle design freedom can play out when we're digital nomads. Do you like a place and want to stay for a while? Stay. Do you want to move on? Move on. Outside of the requirements of whatever visa you're visiting that country on, you get to call the shots, 100%. You also get to call the shots on where you go and how long you stay, your pace of travel, the sorts of places you like to stay in, whether you like to go urban or rural, whether you like to rent apartments or stay in hotels or do the van life thing or participate in co-living and co-working programs, as I'm currently experimenting with this year, and so much more. In short, you can follow your nose wherever it leads you. Which leads me to the next digital nomad pro, which is inspiration. When we travel and are taken out of our familiar surroundings, all of our senses become heightened. This allows us to experience the world around us with fresh eyes and in a new way. We eat new foods, we see new sights, and we learn new ways of doing things. And this usually inspires new forms of creativity. Even if you don't consider yourself to be a creative person or work in a creative industry, you may find that you're inspired in all kinds of ways by virtue of having all the new experiences that travel gives you. Now, this could be said about travel in any sense, including vacations. But when you're living the digital nomad lifestyle, this allows you to go deeper with your experiences of a destination and also to have enough time to reflect on your experiences while you're having them by virtue of the fact that you're living your daily life there rather than just passing through on a vacation, which is completely out of any routine that you're accustomed to. When I lived in the Sacred Valley of Peru, not a day went by when I didn't wake up in the morning and look out my window with such awe and wonder and gratitude for where I was in that moment. The mountains that surrounded me were so inspirational to me, and I did some of my best creative writing, not only for work, but also just for the sheer pleasure of it. All of this inspiration might also inspire you to be more adventurous than perhaps you ever previously considered yourself to be. Travel inspires us to have new experiences, and some of those experiences might push you to face your fears, or even get a little further out of your comfort zone than you ever anticipated going. Not only that, but let's get it right. Being a digital nomad unto itself is an adventure. Every day can be a completely new experience. It's up to you how far you want to go down any rabbit hole of your choosing. This next pro applies only to digital nomads who have given up their home and are traveling the world 100% nomadically. But it's a pretty big pro if you embrace it, and it's that you have nothing tying you down. Imagine not having a raft of monthly bills to pay, like car insurance and utilities and other expenses that come with maintaining a home or a home base. These expenses add up way more than we think, not only financially, but even metaphorically. To be free of these bills, which signify a place that you're being held to, gives you the ability to change and redesign your life on the fly as you travel in whatever way your imagination and inspiration can manage. Before I became a digital nomad, I had no intention of doing even a fraction of the things that presented themselves to me on the road. But with the freedom to do whatever I wanted and the inspiration that life on the road can present, and the lack of anchor that I had tying me to any one place, I was completely able to do some pretty cool things. For example, I totally impulsively spent 3 months living on boats in the Caribbean before falling in love with one particular island and using it as a home base for other island explorations for a couple of years. I spent 2 years apprenticing with a shaman in Peru and 9 months in Ecuador working with a family of shamans. I lived at a retreat center in New Zealand for almost 9 months. I did a seriously last-minute crazy train adventure that was actually the world's longest overland route by train from Lisbon to Ho Chi Minh City. These are just a few of the opportunities that I was able to jump on because I had the total freedom that the digital nomad lifestyle afforded me. But all of this freedom does have a cost. Let's get into the dark side of digital nomadism. The digital nomad lifestyle inherently lacks stability. This is kind of by design. So if you're someone who thrives on having a somewhat predictable framework for your life or routine, you can incorporate that into your lifestyle design. For example, you could build in some stability by maintaining a home base, perhaps in your hometown. I was recently speaking with some digital nomads who found that the best pace of travel for them that helped them to feel stable in their life and work was to travel for 3 months and then spend 3 months in some kind of base that they always return to, where they can unpack, unwind, assimilate their experiences while enjoying some familiar comforts. So while a lack of stability might seem a bit daunting at first, depending on what kind of stability you're looking for, you may still be able to find that you have the best of both worlds. Related to stability is work-life balance, or complete lack thereof. Many, if not most, digital nomads will cite this as one of the bigger challenges with this lifestyle. When everything around you is constantly changing, it can be very difficult to get work done. I created a whole other episode about achieving work-life balance as a digital nomad, so if you want to know more on this topic, I suggest you check that episode out. This next con to the digital nomad lifestyle is pretty significant, and it's that your relationships with your family and friends at home will likely change. Brace yourself, we're going to dig into this one. A few different things happened with my social circles in Toronto after I started traveling full-time. I was actually gone for 2 full years before I returned to Toronto for a visit, and that visit was only 6 weeks long. I actually thought that was going to be long enough for me to see everybody and do all the things I wanted to do, and I quickly learned that 6 weeks was actually not a lot of time. But in those 6 weeks, I tried to see a lot of people who I considered to be friends before I left. Many of those friends I learned were only really friends in a contextual way. For example, I had some really strong relationships with people in the musical theater community because I used to perform in musical theater. But I learned when getting together with them outside of any shows that we were doing together, and after a few years of me having a totally different lifestyle, that we really didn't have all that much in common. So between realizing that a bunch of my friendships weren't quite as deep as I once thought, plus not having a lot of time to properly deeply visit with anybody, I had to make some choices about which friendships I really wanted to invest in. This became even more abundantly clear to me when I was in a near-fatal accident in the Caribbean. It was one of those close calls in life that helped me to reinforce what and who was important to me. But also, it was one of those experiences where my true friends really stood out from the fair weather friends by virtue of how they supported me through that crisis, even from afar. The friends who were really there for me in that difficult time of my life became the people that I committed myself to in a deeper and more long-term way. Even so, my relationships with those people also changed over time. Although these days it's much easier to stay in touch with a variety of convenient ways like messaging and video calls, the more time and distance that you have between you can create rifts that are sometimes hard to overcome. I've had to redefine my relationship with every single friend and family member who I want to keep in my life. Some are not great at communicating with me while we're apart, but when I'm back in town, we just pick up from where we left off and everything's great. So I've learned not to be dependent on them for support while I'm abroad. Others are more communicative with me through messaging, some are better with emails, and some are really good with just picking up the phone and doing impulsive video calls. But that's just the communication part of this equation. The less tangible aspect of this challenge to digital nomad life is that our actual relationships with these people change because we're no longer experiencing the same things together in the same way that we did in other times of our lives that maybe brought us together as friends or family in the first place. Our lives and perspectives on life are changing and evolving as we travel the world. And their lives and perspectives on life are also changing in our absence. A few of my friends got married and had kids while I was traveling, and while we still have the common bond of our history and longevity as friends, a lot more has changed in our lives than has stayed the same. And it's not just their lives that have changed either. I am a completely different person from the Nora that started to travel 17 years ago. And part of the reason I'm different is by virtue of the experiences that I've had on the road. Experiences that most people back home can't understand or relate to. What I've learned is that these newfound differences don't need to spell the end of friendships and relationships with family. I've been on the road long enough that I have seen cycles in these relationships. We grow distant, and then we get close again, and then maybe we grow apart again. I think it's just the stuff of life, and this stuff happens even if we don't travel. But maybe it's a little more noticeable with this lifestyle. It gets worse. While we're busy realizing our relationships with our family and friends back home have changed and in some cases dissolved, it's also hard to have really meaningful relationships on the road. Making friends with locals can be difficult, especially if you're not staying for very long. Put yourself in their shoes. If you knew that someone was only staying for a couple of weeks or maybe a couple of months, would you really want to invest in that friendship? Or how much would you want to invest? Depending on your circumstances and the local culture, you can definitely make friends while you travel, but those friendships tend to be somewhat superficial or limited in terms of how deep they ultimately go. The same goes for friendships with other travelers. While you're much more likely to strike up a fast and intense friendship with a fellow traveler, and you'll be BFFs for the time that you're together, part of what draws you together is that you're in the same situation and having similar experiences in those moments. So when each of you move on to other places, what remains of that friendship can vary dramatically. While things like social media and messaging have allowed me to stay in touch with hundreds of friends that I've made over the years, only a small handful of these friendships are lasting and deep. Going down yet another level in this rabbit hole is romance. Finding compatible love as a digital nomad is not an easy task. I started off the digital nomad lifestyle traveling with a partner who wanted to be with me, but deep down didn't really want to travel the same way that I did. So ultimately, it didn't work. Relationships with locals are also challenging, with cultural divides, differences in lifestyle, and more. Importing someone to the digital nomad lifestyle, also not an easy task, because they're not in the same place as you are as an experienced traveler, and this can create an imbalance in the relationship. And finding long-term love with other digital nomads is also not easy. A lot of people get into this lifestyle for a certain degree or element of freedom that they believe a relationship could impede. So in digital nomad circles, it's very common to meet people who either only want casual relationships or who prefer polyamorous or other non-traditional relationship structures. This could be you, so that could be just fine. But there's one more element to love as a digital nomad that, regardless of the circumstances, is super challenging. And that is, if you do meet somebody that you have a connection with, you have to decide really quickly if you want to spend more time together and how that's going to look. The digital nomad lifestyle, by design, usually has us moving on to other places. And unless you synchronize your travel schedule with that other person, you may find yourself parting company and never meeting up again if you don't set a very specific intention to. It's also an all or nothing thing. When you meet somebody under normal circumstances and you start dating them, you have the ability to get together for dinner or a movie or an activity for like an evening or a day or a weekend. Then you return to your homes and respective lives and you can assimilate that experience with that other person. As a digital nomad, if you meet somebody and want to spend more time with them and end up traveling with them, you're basically moving in together. And that dramatically accelerates the progression of that relationship in ways that maybe neither of you were quite ready for. Okay, moving on from relationships and friendships, let's dig into a few other cons of being a digital nomad before I get to my final 1-2 punch of pros and cons. Newsflash, the digital nomad lifestyle is a lot of work. It takes serious time and effort to research, plan, book, and execute the sheer mechanics of travel. A recent survey revealed that the #1 frustration for digital nomads with this lifestyle is finding accommodation. And it's not just about finding a place to sleep either. It's choosing the country, then picking the city, then finding the neighborhood before trying to zero in on the type of accommodation, then figuring out where and how to find it at a price that fits your budget. It's definitely got significantly easier in recent years, and in the description, I will link to a resource that I created specifically to help digital nomads find monthly accommodation. I literally use this every single time I'm looking for a place to stay when I'm planning my own travels. I also speak more about the work that goes into this lifestyle in my episode about the ugly truth of full-time travel, so check that out to learn some solid coping mechanisms for this problem. I'm rounding out this episode with something that is simultaneously a pro and a con, and that is personal growth. The amount of personal growth that comes from living a digital nomad lifestyle is immense. This is definitely a pro. By exposing ourselves to different ways of life, different cultures, different foods, different languages, and more, we broaden our horizons, and we also challenge our perceptions of what we once thought were facts. I had some definite ideas of right and wrong when I started traveling that were challenged when I saw other people living their lives or behaving in a way that was contrary to my beliefs. Having sampled different ways of life and forged friendships with people around the world, I have dramatically expanded my ability to be compassionate and empathetic and open-minded. I am much less likely to suggest that anybody or anything is right or wrong with the same degree of conviction that I once had. Here's the dark side to all of this personal growth. Once you open up this Pandora's box, there's no going back. You can't unsee the things that you see when you travel and live around the world. And this will affect how you interact with the world around you, and it will challenge all the assumptions that you had. This is also one of the primary reasons why your relationships with your friends and family back home will change, and not always for the better. Travelers often refer to this phenomenon as reverse culture shock, where you're surprised and often disappointed by your home country or culture by virtue of having traveled the world. The good news is, reverse culture shock and these kinds of surprises can be overcome. It simply requires you to be as open-minded and accepting of your home country and culture as you are of the world around you when you travel. And to understand that regardless of how we live and travel, or not travel, through this world, we are always changing and growing. The only constant in life is change. I didn't realize I had so much to say about the digital nomad lifestyle and the pros and cons of it. And I don't really feel like I've covered it all, but I have to stop somewhere. Is there anything that I missed that you've experienced in your own travels? Is there some part of what I said in this episode that you'd like me to dive deeper on? Please let me know in the comments. In the meantime, check the description for some interesting links and further reading. And on the next screen, you'll see some related content picked just for you. I'm Nora Dunn, AKA The Professional Hobo, and I'll catch you next time.